Aloha and welcome to Coffee Without Milk, a podcast presented by Maui Institute for Modern Music and Ebb and Flow Arts. More information about upcoming concerts, events, and educational opportunities can be found at www.ebbandflowarts.org.
Hello, greetings. Welcome to a new podcast series of Ebb and Flow Arts and its special aspirational wing we call the Maui Institute for Modern Music. Why, that's a pretty fancy title there, Doctor. Indeed, Loli, because we are a fancy outfit. You can see our wonderful production values in the back. Gorgeous. Well, Loli, this new series is called Coffee Without Milk. What? Well, it's about a joke. There it is. It's about a joke that describes our position in the coronavirus epidemic. And now, if you will excuse me 1 second. Well, Yoli, the joke goes like this. Man walks in, the restaurant has a seat, asks the waiter, "Could I have some coffee without cream?" And the waiter says, "I'm sorry, sir, we're out of cream, but we do have milk. Would you like coffee without milk?" Oh, what's so funny? Well, Loli, it describes our situation. We don't have the option of not doing something, even though we may not want to do it, but we still like to have the option, and here we sit. Yeah, it's been kind of difficult to be in my one lily pad the whole time. You don't get any opportunity to meet with your friends? No. Well, Loli, today we're going to have a wonderful discussion with the grand wizard of Ebb and Flow Arts, Peter Swanzy. There he is.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Lolly. What a wonderful introduction. And I want to ask you a question, Lolly. If you were allowed to leave your lily pad, would you? Or is it only because you're not allowed that you want to?
Well, from time to time, for instance, for Easter, we used to go hunting for frog's eggs with my cousin Henry, who's a few lily pads down. So, of course, we would go hunting over there, you know. But right now, it's difficult because there are rare moments where it would be nice to go out, but you know, we can't.
I have no doubt
Loli.
Maybe the professor feels the same way. Maybe the professor prefers to stay indoors by choice, to learn by choice instead of being forced to stay at home.
I enjoy the joys. I enjoy the joys of being at home. And it's fine for us, and we live in a beautiful environment. Indeed. But really, this is about a discussion with Peter Swanzy, who is involved in so many of Ebb and Flow's projects. But most recently, there's a very exciting one at the Maui Ocean Center. Oh, yes, the aquarium at the Maui. Indeed.
Well, I can talk about that a little bit if you should we start with that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you know what we hope to do with the Maui Ocean Center is take advantage of their full dome environment and Goodbye, Lolly. Goodbye, Professor. I'll welcome back Robert Pollock at any time. We hope to take advantage of their. Let me just get through this, Professor. Let me get through this. The Full Dome environment to present, music, video, modern work, video arts from, a lot of Hawaii-based composers, as well as a lot of composers who are part of the rich compendium of modern electronic music. The Dome environment is a fantastic place to create a show because it's so immersive. You're surrounded by the images and you're surrounded by the sound, especially when we create 3D work. So for this particular presentation, I will be contributing some work, music and video, as well as other composers and artists on the island. Gary Greenberg and Tom Vendetti are creating a film, as well as Michael Takamoto with the music of Dr. Bob Wehrman. And it's something that we like to invite collaboration on with artists around the world, and also pull a little bit from the books of history, electronic music. We do also feature live music in the planetarium environment. Iggy Jang has worked with Takuma Ito, both from Oahu, or based in Oahu, to create a live sound and electronic music with video. And the video is programmed and done live by the planetarium staff. So the Maui Ocean Center Dome isn't technically a planetarium, but it is a dome environment, much like a planetarium, with massive, high resolution, rich color, beautiful imagery. And I can tell they're really excited to get this program going. Once this crisis is over with, I have no doubt that we're going to get right back into it. We're still hoping for a June performance. It definitely seems like that possibility is less and less likely by the day, just because none of us know really what's happening. But that will be a very exciting presentation. It'll be our, I want to say at least our 11th Music of the Spheres presentation, Robert.
There may have been, well, if you count double presentations at Imaginarium during those Haliku festivals. Here's the
the press kit that goes with it. So do you want to open that? Do you want to show that out a little bit? So we created this promotional material to kind of
largely designed by Peter, and
I don't think I have a copy of mine handy, but we go over the goals and mission of the performances. We typically fill the house. We take a lot of risks with these shows. We invite live performers. We work with local artists and performers on each island that we perform in. We've performed at the Imaginarium as part of the Poliku Arts Festival, and also as a standalone performance, and at the Imiloa Astronomy Center. And just fantastic feedback about it. The one challenge I have working in a full dome environment is that it's so immersive that any little rotation in the video, any kind of zoom, it pulls you in so deeply. It's almost like a virtual reality experience. So, when we talk about living in a hologram, that's kind of the experience I get when I'm in the dome. It feels like no matter which direction you look, you're a part of the imagery. So it's almost as though you understand what it's like to look in or look out through somebody else's eyes, through the vision of these artists that we're working with. And that's part of what makes it exciting, but it can be a little disorienting. It's that incredible to be a part of.
Yeah. Totally immersive is the term that was used in our grant applications currently. So the Fred Baldwin Memorial Foundation informed us yesterday that they're deferring their decision on our proposal, which was for the Music of the Spheres, which is certainly reasonable, and then we'll resubmit next round, probably the same application. It just,
Right. These are unsure times, and it's important that artists and presenters like Ebb and Flow Arts explore every resource possible to continue to develop work during this time where most people are furloughed. I would imagine that right now would be a fantastic time for artists and creators to be developing new work. We have this amazing social point of reflection. Not only are we isolated, but I'd say now more than ever, we're trying to reach out and connect with each other. You know, I find myself calling friends and family all the time, daily. It's almost part of my routine and my schedule now. And I wonder how other artists are approaching this. I was talking with a visual artist friend of mine today, and I'm going to kind of describe the work that he's been developing. He's created a drawing. It might be charcoal or at least pencil, where the earth is sort of shaped like the images of the virus. And taking a cue from David Bowie's Space Oddity, are all these people floating about in tin cans, all connected by strings to each other and to the earth. So floating isolated in a tin can, and yet being grounded and also unified, not by the fear of getting sick, but unified by the concern for each other, and also the concern for our families and our loved ones who it's hard to see people right now, you know, unless you're seeing them through a computer screen or a phone screen.
That's right. That's right.
Now, you were talking about, Robert, possibly curating or commissioning some work based on a similar theme in terms of isolation and the feelings. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, it's in formation. It's not a set notion. One factor involved would be if we were to commission works in the time of Corona, or however we wanted to, title the series of compositions, which also could include artwork, visuals, film, photography.
I mean, I'm kind of envisioning a space. I mean, imagine like a gallery with a hall and a couple of rooms. And as the audience viewer walk in, there's some sound environments they're walking into. They might see some video on the far wall, and there's art hanging here and there. In one room could be, live music or another sound environment, and it could be an entire sort of installation piece, maybe as a collaboration, to to celebrate the fact that we can all get together again. I feel like it's a great idea. It could go in a lot of directions.
Spirit of our previous work, for example, we might suppose a composer creates a piece that we can perform live, and then we could have appropriate imagery with it, dance, movement with it, and so on. It might become a part multimedia. But one of the thoughts, though, is suppose restrictions are lifted in not too long a time. They're talking now about lifting by May 1 some restrictions. But what do you think, Peter? It's going to be a much more gradual and extended period of time.
I get the feeling that anything they say at this point is arbitrary. The best that they can do is, on the one hand, the information that is released in terms of numbers, as the numbers still increase, but people find, more effective ways to adapt to their restrictions, having to wear masks in public. I don't know, if it will end easily, or if it will ever really end, or if we're sort of adapting to similar situations here on out. It's a challenging thing to think about, because what would the world look like when this is over? I mean, now that we've all had this awareness brought to us about this invisible enemy, as some have called it, we are, I think, more careful with each other, more careful about, the germs, and more careful about being in public and being close to each other. I think it's going to be natural for all of us to congregate again and to enjoy each other's company. But if I hope it all ends smoothly and peacefully, and that's about all I can hope for at this point. Soon would be fine, but I don't know what to expect.
Well, it's interesting. Well, So this project sounds like if we initiate it, should be pretty soon, you know. Let's get people working, thinking about it. Among other things, they probably have a lot of other priorities, but it's something we can do. It's in line with our mission. It maybe is a bit helpful and ultimately could yield interesting public events. And in lieu of concerts that we were supposed to produce that were canceled, particularly the duo diorama concerts end of March.
Yeah.
This might be a way to go. So we will be keeping everyone posted about this and probably initiate some commissions and discuss it with our board members, some of whom might actually contribute, you know.
Yeah, I think that, you know, in some way, everybody, I feel like it would be a great project to be led by certain, you know, recognized talents locally, creative artists and performers, but also to make it something that the community could contribute to in some way, not necessarily like an Art Maui where they hang their piece up and it gets judged whether it will be included or not, but find a way that they can contribute, even like a wall where they write, you know, messages to each other. I've seen that in some installations, but find some way to engage the audience with this experience. Find a venue, find a group of artists who want to support this. I feel like all those resources are out there. We just have to figure out when we can book them.
Peter, do you have any tracks of your music that we could put on now?
Yeah, you know, I was going through some of the work that I've put onto YouTube to share with folks, and
so Peter is our technical producer of Ebb and Flow Arts, and he's a composer and visual artist and videographer. He does all of our posters, designs, and of course he's the main driving force in Music of the Spheres, having acquired these skills that enable him to produce basically full dome films. In this case, apparently the advanced nature of the dome at the Maui Ocean Center, it provides a lot of shortcuts or cutting corners, so to speak, in terms of getting to the result. It doesn't need as much preliminary work as we were used to in Oahu and on the Big Island.
Sure. Well, you know, each system has its own technical challenges because basically each planetarium system is designed, you know, proprietarily. So the owners of the projection system and the computer system, like with servers, would probably license that to the facility to use, and almost like they're paying a rental fee, and that would include the software that they would need. And it also could come with packaged shows. So when you go to a planetarium and you watch a show about exploring, you know, the distant horizons of space, or even like a, you know, a Led Zeppelin kind of musical show, a lot of those shows are basically canned. So they're created by, you know, producers for these environments. And then also what's amazing about the more advanced planetarium facilities, that they have real-time 3D celestial navigation. So the operators, the technical operators can fly their audiences through the universe improvisationally. They can go and explore, they can find star systems and planets, everything that's programmed into this massive environment. And so we hope to take advantage of the most cutting edge technology possible to create these shows. And that's why we like to work with the cutting edge facilities, because their dome operators know how to navigate and can create, you know, visuals that really effectively accompany some of the music that we want to present that lack any other kind of visual composition. So that's why it's such a great collaborative effort with these facilities.
Yeah. We're very enthused and encouraged that the technical director at the Maui Ocean Center, Matthew Lupke, seems very pleased with the challenges we're presenting him. And
yeah, oh yeah. And a couple things I wanted to mention. I have 2, maybe 3 different works I want to play a small piece of. So the first one is the Charles Warren Times Zirconium Part 2. What we did to create this work, we're just going to listen to and view a short sample of it. But we worked with a local painter named Martha Woodbury, and she contributed a large collection of her paintings that we could cut and edit along to the music to create a full dome experience. So let's see here. I'm going to share my screen and figure out how all this works. There we go. And let me make sure the audio is on. So we'll just kind of view the first minute or so of this work.
yeah, and this is Charles Warren.
So when we create this video, we're using the work of the artist Martha Woodbury, and we cut through a lot of her paintings for kind of each section of the work. And as the work progresses, it goes from painting to painting, and the paintings are manipulated in ways that reflect what may be happening musically. And so that's just the first minute of this work. And
so this is also Charles Charles Warren in memoriam, in that he passed away a few weeks ago.
That recently, yeah.
81. And that work won the Pulitzer Prize, Times Encomium. And it goes on, that's only one part of 2. It goes on, what, almost 20 minutes, 16?
So that was the beginning of part 2 of Times Zirconium, and that was only the first minute. It's the second part of the entire work is about 17 minutes. The entire work, I want to say, is nearly 30 minutes, if not longer.
Yeah, it's quite a piece. One of his few electronic works. And you synchronize it. You can tell the subtleties of the synchronization. That's your work, Peter. And of course, the apropos beautiful images of Martha Woodbury made for a wonderful presentation in both. Did we do it in both? But we certainly did it in Hilo.
Oh yeah, we've performed this work a couple times. In fact, I want to cut back to it. I just found another section later. So let me just put it back on screen real quick, if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. So this is a bit later. This is about 9 minutes into the work. And I'll make sure the audio is being shared. So I'll pause it there and come back to you. So what we do, when we have 2D artwork and we want to present it, is we want to create scenes and moments where the artwork appears to interact with the music. Now, Times Zirconium is such a beautiful, complex work. The nature of creating a 2D or bringing 2D art into the dome, we had to make something that was visually stunning and also kind of spun around and brought the audience into it. So you can imagine that you're looking directly up at this work as it's spinning around your head and flashing back and forth and focusing your eyes in different parts of the dome. So it's not really meant to be disorienting. What it's meant to do is communicate at least a similar aesthetic that the music is also communicating. So wasn't that, I think he
skills come to play as a trained musician and a visual artist and a videographer. It really makes for a very effective presentation. There was an unforgettable moment for me in Hilo when this piece was done, overhearing one of the audience members. It was full. It was my recollection, full house in the Imaloa Planetarium, and a woman during the piece or some made a loud whisper to her neighbor saying, "I don't understand this music." But you know, it was a level of acknowledgement in a way that was for me pleasing, and that's perhaps you share this too, this sense that Ebb and Flow Arts opens up worlds of music to our audiences that they often have had no experience of, no contact with. So certainly some are trained in the sense they've been to concerts or they heard music on the radio or what have you, and on CDs and through the internet and other means, but they make music themselves. But not a lot of people have realized that there's this vast treasure of works that Ebb and Flow Arts focuses on presenting, and often stuns our listeners in a good way, in a way that they've risen above the sense there's no milk to sense they might want to have their music but without milk, in the knowledge that it's there, and maybe that makes the whole art form richer for it.
I think so. And I think additionally, we as a society, we enjoy art that challenges us. The unfortunate part about challenging music is that most people aren't even aware that it exists because they would otherwise have no access to it. Thankfully, with the internet and the streamlined flow of information, anybody can access it, but where do they start? So the interesting thing I wanted to add about Wernin's Times Zirconium, I'm going to share a picture from my screen real quick. And what we see here is three gentlemen standing in front of the RCA Mark II synthesizer. And the RCA Mark II synthesizer was installed at Columbia University in the late 1950s. And that was what Charles Warren used to compose Times Zirconium. So let's just look at that again and consider for a moment how that was considered to be a musical instrument, how that machine there produced sound. I mean, all the banks of oscillators, and if you look, you can see dials and maybe a little computer printout page. So
Milton Babbitt there?
The picture's uncredited, but it sure must be.
Vladimir Osuchevsky is on the right. Probably.
Yeah, so Ushachevsky's on the right.
Middle? Do we know who that one? Anyway.
I can I'll look in the background. So composing it on that work, composing that work on that machine is.
Yeah.
There were no computers available then. Oh, here's another great image of it too. So this is the same device. You can see all the complex bells and whistles and what looks like a little slide, maybe some kind of a motion machine there on the lower left. Who knows what that was for the entertainment of the composer while they were waiting for the sounds to process maybe.
Yeah. now you can have that in an iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. You can have that. You could do it with your fingertips on a touchscreen. It's probably not the same, but it's pretty exciting what's possible now. There's a lot of great free software apps on the internet just by searching for them that are, developed by musicians and composers, but mostly computer programmers, engineers, JavaScript programmers, web designers, creating these interactive websites where any user can pop in and click around and drag their mouse around and create a lot of sounds, compositions, anything they want. And you can record it too. There's a lot of resources now. It's almost as though it's just we're on the edge, and we have been for, at least 20 years, on the edge of real interactive music where humans and electronics and computers all interact with each other to create something complex. Something that they'd been developing at the Contemporary Music Research Institute in Paris, throughout the 80s with composers like Yanis Xenakis and Kaya Sarajevo, creating work that was meant to have computer feedback.
You will have a work probably, although who knows, it could be a new one by the time the production hopefully happens, but you have a work, Nalu, and have done so many works for our Music of the Spheres. Is there anything of yours that you could bring up?
Yeah, let's see if I can find my copy of Nalu. So I recorded a work, Nalu is the name of it. I shot the entire video with drone, bird's eye view, looking down at waves crashing against the rocks. So that was my theme concept visually. And what I wanted to do was explore the Hawaiian word Nalu means wave. And I wanted to explore ways that you could create waves using sound. So I used a couple of programs that are able to digest images, and I would set parameters, what kind of a sound I wanted, what kind of filters, what kind of noise generators, and all the shapes of all the images were wave shapes. And then I would mix those together and find ways to weave them in and out of each other to create themes. And it was almost like in a sonata form. So it was sort of an ABA, sort of with everything kind of broken down into much smaller pieces. I'm going to look for that for a second. Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the other work we've featured in recent performances, Robert, while I'm looking for that?
Well, another project you're involved with is the Korea exchange. And so that goes on, we hope. We've heard a lot of comparisons to South Korea recently in measuring responses to the pandemic. But this South Korean exchange has been ongoing for decades, really, due to association and friendship with between myself and Dr. Eugene Lee initially. But today we're working with his successor and new music group organization, Veritas Musicae in Seoul, Korea. And they've been having concerts annually that feature some of our work that Ebb and Flow Arts has commissioned. And generally the theme has been over the last 3-4 years to compose pieces inspired by a Korean poem of the composer's choice. And so this year again, we're embarked, some of us from America will participate. Mostly it will be composers from Seoul associated with Veritas Musicae and musicians from Korea, usually, fine musicians. The work must be this year for from the combination of clarinet, violin, and piano. And so what poem, or do you have 3 poems? Is that correct that you've?
Yeah, I am working with 3 poems from a poet named Chung Ho Seung, probably terribly mispronouncing that. And the theme of the three poems is actually not too far from our coronavirus themes of isolation. So the first one I'm working with is called The Snow Path. And I won't be able to read it in Korean, so we're probably missing some of the subtleties of it. But in English, it translates to, I see someone's footsteps that have walked on the all-white snow path. They belong to a bird. Good heavens. And I wanted to focus on environmentally connected works until I get to this one here. So this one is called To the Poor Person. Today again, for you, I hang a lamp outside the window. Today again, I couldn't wait for you any longer, and I hung a heart outside the window. Night has come, wind blows, and at last snow falls. I couldn't wait for you any longer, and I became a man of poor heart. I became a man who suddenly thinks of a star as I walk alone on the snow-covered field. And so I borrow a line from that work for the title of the piece that I'm developing. At last snow falls is what I decided to call the entire cycle. Not really a cycle, but so I'm trying to find themes that connect three poems outside of the environment in terms of a feeling. So they all kind of spoke to me about being alone at night, seeing the stars, leaving your footsteps in the snow, where you might be gone, but there's traces of you. And maybe there's traces of you on the earth in the snowy footprints, or, like in the Navajo culture, they see the stars, and there's stories about how the stars are the campfires of their ancestors. So maybe we leave an impression below and we exist eternally above, and I'm sure that there's a lot of parallels you could draw religiously or through different religious beliefs too in that same way. So I'm working with these poems because I find they have a certain elegance that I want to imitate with the musical passages. So the trio, as you mentioned, the piano, clarinet, violin, I'm going to find ways to feature each instrument to play the role of the character in each of these poems. And I find that aesthetically, a lot of it is kind of in the minimalist kind of Steve Reich style of composition, where I have sort of pulsing sounds that kind of I'm focusing on, varying the amplitudes of the instruments and trying to kind of recolor their combinations based on their harmonic intervals, and trying to also find ways to make them, wild passages and then suddenly a very quiet passage. So to create contrast in the sense of dynamics and, how fast or slow different sections are. It's been a lot of fun to explore because I've actually also been trying to learn a little bit more about traditional Korean music and trying to borrow some of those harmonic aesthetics as well. So trying to keep it culturally relevant, as well as, honest to hopefully what the poet would have thought these works might sound like as well.
Well, it sounds like you're off to developing something quite exciting for this. And
I hope so. I only have, maybe I have a series of ideas. I have a few that I've put together. So everything's a work in progress until, that great inspiration hits. And then you just crank through something for as many hours or days as it takes to finish it.
Well, it's a clever concept that they've been using now in these concerts, that a work inspired by a poem, not a setting, not a musical, setting with a singer. No words really are necessary. But behind the music is this mood, idea, evocation of a poem. So, for example, there are no copyright issues, probably because just to consider something an inspiration, that probably doesn't require that legal licensing or anything, the way a setting of a poem would.
It's interesting you mentioned it. I imagine that they probably print the poems somewhere when they create these archives, these collections.
True, then they would need permission, yeah.
But nonetheless, it's like an experiment. I'm sorry, it's an exercise I did when I was in college with my professor, Stephen Miller, the late Stephen Miller, unfortunately. But he, in one of our first composition lessons, presented a poem that had, it was like an iambic pentameter sort of, rhythm and scheme to it. And he wanted me to compose music based on it. So I went beyond just the words themselves, and I listened to the patterns of the syllables, and I translated those patterns into musical themes, and then I reorganized all the musical themes. So it was pretty much a verbatim transcription of the poem that had been reset as all these different notes, intervals. It was almost like a 12-tone compositional style, but instead of those 12 tones being the basics of this language, I translated the poem to be the basics of this musical language. And then it just, it was through composed from start to finish once I had the concept. So there's a lot of different ways that one could treat poetry. And sometimes the more visually evocative it is, the more one might hear sounds and colors that would accompany it. But I prefer something simple, something with just one statement, like a haiku, just a few short syllables. It just sets a scene and it provokes some thought. Sorry, say that again.
First poem sounded like a haiku.
It sure is short enough.
And like you say, the translation of the calligraphy is always going to be wanting.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
It's a picture of the words. You can almost feel it from the rough, English translation. There's something about it that is evocative of visual imagery.
Well, if you watch Korean films, and there's been a lot of great ones in the last decade, and some of them have won awards, they have a certain storytelling aesthetic, which I think resonates within Korean poetry and especially within Korean music. There is a certain aesthetic to the way that Korean filmmakers will tell their stories and write their screenplays and develop their characters, where the beginning of every film I've seen in Korean film it just drops you right into a story. And you have to start by trying to associate who the characters are, what they know of each other. And then as the story develops, you realize that everything you thought about the characters is just scratching the surface of who they really are. And the story is them developing in their interactions with each other and exposing more about themselves. I guess that's the case in a lot of great cinema, but especially in the Korean aesthetic, I believe. And I think it feels the same way with the poetry that I read considering for this work too.
Well, why don't we close, Peter? What do you think? And with one of your playback, one of your pieces, Nalu.
Oh, that sounds great. So I had been talking about Nalu. However, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who, for all the viewers at home who would love to be a part of the show we're putting on. So what I want to do is play a work called Awakenings. And I just clicked away from it, so I'm going to try to bring it back. But Awakenings was a work that I created using a fisheye lens, walking around the environment of Haleakala on Maui. And what I love about Awakenings is that it was my first attempt at creating a fully immersive hemispherical presentation that wasn't, using stitched together video in 3D and a lot of After Effects and shadows and lighting and a bunch of stuff. I wanted to create this entire work in camera. And musically, it's all electronic music. And I wanted to get back to my basics of actual programming music. So sound design using C Sound. So I used C Sound to program and compose this entire work. And I wanted the video to feel organic and raw, and I wanted the sound to feel organic and raw. I wanted to basically use as little effect as possible, something that I could just kind of create and chisel out of the available languages. So I'm actually waiting for it to load. This must be the time of day where the internet slows down worldwide, of course.
have you do that, and then
I'm all set to go. So what I'm going to do is we're going to switch over to my work Awakenings. This was composed, I want to say, about 3 years ago, and it must have been for the Pollock Festival. Although who knows? Time is meaningless these days, as some of you out there may agree.
Featured in both venues.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to it now, and we're going to experience the first at least few minutes of Awakenings, maybe the entire work.
Yeah.
That's
Great.
fun to revisit the work. I just a moment before we go to reflect on that. I remembered actually the inspiration for it was laying down and looking up at the trees. I had a friend, a really close friend who'd passed away that year, and I was reflecting on this person and thinking, well, what if I follow this thought and take a walk, and my shadow, plays a part in the work. And
Yeah.
just the title of the work, Awakenings, also speaks to the idea that death isn't the end, it's the beginning, or it's just part of the continuity of everything. And two of the great inspirations of music, love and death. So I had to choose one for that, and it was a reflection on the impact that this person had on my life and the casual wonderings of where they are now.
Yeah, that opening and closing image it's almost like a stained glass cathedral look.
I like the boost in saturation of the colors, especially at the end. And I really like all of my work to kind of start and end at the same place. I like it to kind of have sort of a cyclical or a spiral sort of nature. And so it'll always come back to a theme. It'll always revisit it. And sometimes the ending, is the beginning, and like a palindrome maybe of music. Next time we'll play it backwards and it'll be a new work.
ABA.
Sure. Or, you could reverse that and then it would be ABA.
Yeah.
Either way. ABA, either way.
Right. Also, it seems could be the playback is not the quality on my computer and so, but my recollection, a lot of the excitement in the music is the way on the surface at least, single tone actually has tremendous amount of nuance within it, inner pulsings and reverberations. That it's a kind of almost second level of musical life, really.
That's something that I explore from. So Jean-Claude Risset is a composer who got me started working with C sound. I didn't know him personally at all, but he did a lot of work in C sound. In the early days of C sound, when it was Music 5 or something. So back in the early 80s, and
so this is a computer program that you have.
Yeah, it's a line code program, kind of like it's based in the older language of C++. So each line would be, here's your oscillator instrument and here are the parameters that control it. And that would be your orchestra file, which has a bunch of different instruments completely spelled out, where using just line code, you're routing the sound. Or in the analog synthesizer tradition, you're routing the voltages from module to module, so that an oscillator might be controlling the frequency of a filter over here, and that filter is affecting the sound of something else. And so using C sound, you basically create a patchwork of audio instruments, and then you create a score file that has to do with the timings, the durations, and where you also fulfill all the different parameters of each instrument that you design. So, I mean, the sky is the limit. It's a lot of fun to work with because you don't really know what you get until you compile the code at the end. And then once the code is compiled, you listen, and it's amazing. You can listen within moments of compiling the code, because in the long far gone days of the Bell Laboratory Fortran computer system, a composer would they would create a work and they would punch all the computer cards and they would send them off to Bell Labs to be rendered, and they would get an audio tape back, and maybe it would be horrible or it wouldn't work at all, and it could take weeks to find out the answer. So even with C sound, we're fortunate that it's convenient enough that we can still do it right in the comfort of our own homes and have the immediate accessibility to the result. But it's fun because it's a challenge. It's dissociated. So to create music, using a line code program like C sound, you have to have a lot of concepts that you bring to the table. and you have to try to explore how you want to create those sounds and the different ways you can manipulate them. So I'm drawing charts and diagrams and trying to connect things together and showing visually how all the audio patches together, and then trying to decide whether, is this the sound I want? Is this acceptable? Is this within the, the basic idea of my vision for the work? And usually what ends up happening is that you'll work with a lot of disparate elements and try to find ways to combine them together. And it always leads to something unexpected. So I consider it, exploring the new frontier of composition, because nothing is straightforward with it. And there's no real visual cue or anything audio you can work with. You just have to compile that code and see what you get, and hopefully you know enough going into it that you can at least make sound in the first place, which took me a while to get there. But it's a lot of fun to compose that way, just because it's such a different experience.
Are you still using it now?
I wish I was. I still have it, and I haven't used it. I probably haven't done anything in C Sound since this work, so it's been a few years. I have no doubt that it would be a great challenge to pick up again, as it was for that work too. I had to basically teach myself again how to do it, and that was why I wanted to do it again. So that's why I used it to compose that.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
it works beautifully. And so perhaps we should say to be continued.
That's great. Yeah. I've appreciated this conversation. I look forward to a lot of insightful guests, and one of these days, Robert, I'll put you in the hot seat, and we'll dig deep into that composer's mind and that performer's mind of yours, because I know you have an awful lot to contribute musically, and with your insight and all of your genius as well.
Okay, I appreciate that, Peter, and thank you again for all you've done over these last 13, 14, 15 years with Ebb and Flow.
14 years now. Yeah, 14 years.
Shall we say close to indispensable?
No, everybody's replaceable, Robert.
Well, the old joke from the New Yorker magazine is a man comes into the boss's office, and the boss says, "Henderson, you've become indispensable to this firm. And if there's one thing we don't need, is someone who's indispensable. You're fired." But
yeah.
No, it's been great, Peter, and wonderful that you can, sort of contribute many of your multiple talents, and so it's resulted in this long-standing program of Music of the Spheres. And so we get back to that, and the hope that we're just postponed, that is from our June 13 program, our maiden voyage at the Maui Ocean Center is postponed, date to be determined, a lot of things, duo diorama, dates to be determined next season, and so on. And then we'll mull over this project for newly created works in the time of Corona, and try to get that off the ground before we do another one of these podcasts.
A lot to look forward to. And in the meantime, hopefully we're all staying creative and busy too, and making the most of our isolation and our coffee without milk.
Yes.